In right now, though, Congressman Ed Royce. He is the chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman. When I interviewed this self-appointed minister, he refused to answer any question about Russia. And when I pressed him about whether or not he's getting aid, he said, "It's not for me to discuss another sovereign. Go talk to them." He was surrounded by who I am told are Russian military. What do you think the reality is?
The reality is exactly that. I was in eastern Ukraine, and we were in the neighboring state, Dnipropetrovsk, and indeed, what we found was that they were catching Russian agents in that area. Those Russian agents were there to try to support upheaval, to try to foment revolution in the region. And as we talked to civil society leaders, women's groups, different minority groups, in order to make sure we talk to all of the Russian groups, Russian-speaking groups in eastern Ukraine, they all gave us the same message. Tell the Russians to butt out. They're bringing the weapons in. As long as Putin does that, it keeps this chaos going.
So identifying the problem seems to be fairly simple, Congressman. As I don't know if you can see the scene behind me, but I'm sure you're familiar with it. The question is very obvious. What are you going to do about this? The self-appointed prime minister had a smile on his face when I talked about the U.S. and Western authorities maybe taking action against this region of fighters, or maybe even Russia because of this. There was a smile on his face. Do you believe there's anything you can do to influence what's going on in this place?
Absolutely. We need U.S. leadership right now, because with all of the anger that you see in Europe and in Asia and around the world over this issue, this is the first opportunity we have to force Putin's hand. Now, that vote is going to come today in the Security Council. Samantha Power, our UN ambassador, is going to raise this issue. Already, Russia is trying to water this down. But the international community is going to take a stand here on this resolution, and afterwards, they should look at international sanctions. We need the international will to come together here. Listen, Russia's transferred 150 tanks, rocket launchers, and similar heavy equipment there recently into eastern Ukraine. They are ramping this up. They've shot down 12 planes so far. This one just happened to be a civilian jetliner. Now is the time to put the pressure on Putin. So U.S. leadership to get the Europeans and the rest of the world on board for the types of strong sanctions that would force Putin's hand.
Congressman, you're talking about ramping up of violence in the region. We've also been seeing, though, ramping up of sanctions over time against Russia. But now we still are seeing that Russia has not seen this as leverage for them to really have to act in any way that the international community wants Vladimir Putin to act. At some point, doesn't it become a moral imperative, a moral responsibility for the United States to lead and to do more? There are 298 souls that have been lost innocently in this tragedy.
Well, that's what I just indicated. I mean, we have been in favor of doing more support. Well, the problem so far is sanctions are usually U.S. sanctions here. The question has been, how do you get the Dutch on board? Well, the Dutch last time were one of the countries that did not want to support these additional sanctions and watered them down. I can guarantee you the Dutch have changed their position, and not just the Dutch. I can guarantee you that from Malaysia to Central Asia to East Asia, everyone now recognizes that the transfer of this kind of offensive weaponry, missiles, into the hands of poorly trained separatists is a threat to everyone. So I think Putin's going to be under enormous pressure. Now's the time for us to lead and bring about an international coalition to isolate him, not just diplomatically, as we will at the UN today, but also economically in terms of sector sanctions. And I think we'll have the power now to do it if we're aggressive and do it. But remember, we have not, up until now, the administration has not really helped Ukraine on the ground. So you've got these massive influx of Russian agents and Russian heavy weaponry, and we haven't done anything in response to that.
Well, should the U.S. do more to help the Ukrainians on the ground, Chairman? Do you think the United States should be sending weaponry? Should the United States be sending people to train the the Ukrainian forces here. And as you were talking about the European leaders, you're talking about the Netherlands and I assume Germany as well. Are you really confident that after all this time, finally Germany, among others, will step forward and say, hey, we'll pay a little bit extra for fuel and maybe levy heavier sanctions on Russia?
Now's the time for Germany to step forward on this, because when we were in Dnipropetrovsk, the neighboring state there to Donetsk, we had an opportunity, as I indicated, to talk to Russian speakers at every level, right up to the governor on down, to all of the leaders in civil society. And the message was the same. There's only one thing that prevents peace. Look, we have a very generous peace plan put forward by Poroshenko here. The only thing that prevents it is the machinations of Putin and his Russian agents. That needs to stop. For that to stop, Europe has to stand with the United States, and so does Asia, and the rest of the international community. And we have to go forward with a type of leverage that only Putin will understand and respond to. Until we do that, he will continue to create this chaos.
Mr. Chairman, it's Wolf Blitzer in Jerusalem. As we speak right now, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, is on his plane. He's flying to Cairo. He's trying to help get some sort of ceasefire. Is that doable right now? Do you have confidence in the Secretary of State that he knows what he's doing right now?
I have confidence that this ceasefire is the way to go, because, as you indicated, the Arab League is on board, Egypt's on board. Who isn't on board is Hamas. I remember my discussions with you. I was in Haifa, you were in Jerusalem during the Second Lebanon War. And at that point in time, there were hundreds of rockets coming into Haifa. 600 people, Israelis, were in the hospital there, in the trauma hospital where I had visited. And I can tell you, if it wasn't for the Iron Dome, you'd have much more serious casualties across Israel today. So Israel is going to take this opportunity, as long as the rockets are being fired at it, to try to go in and get the tunnels and suppress those launchers. But they can't stop until the rockets are no longer being launched, the rockets supplied by Iran to Hamas. For that to happen, you know, it's going to take a negotiated ceasefire, and that's the attempt right now that our Secretary of State is involved in.
Do you believe the Israelis are overreacting right now? They're facing a lot of international condemnation. You see these awful pictures, the kids who have been killed in Gaza, the civilians who have been made refugees. Has Israel gone too far, in your opinion, Mr. Chairman?
Oh, no. No, I think that's a mischaracterization, because I have seen on the ground in these situations the way in which Israel goes to the utmost length. They will put their soldiers in harm's way in order to try to minimize civilian casualties. And remember what Hamas is doing here. It's putting these rockets specifically, you know, in areas where they ask civilians to come and you know, protect the rockets, while their own commanders are underground in bunkers. This is the thing that really makes me irate. The Hamas commanders will go down in the bunkers, and they will ask human shields to try to protect the rockets, and then they'll light these rockets off and send them to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. This is unconscionable, and that's what is producing civilian casualties. It's not by intent. The intent here by Hamas is to have civilian casualties. The intent by Israel is to try to prevent it. So it's just absolutely ironic that it is portrayed this way, given the efforts that Israel takes. And remember, 2,000 rockets have now been fired at Tel Aviv and at Jerusalem and other cities in Israel. What other countries would put up with that kind of conduct by Hamas? Those rockets, by the way, these longer range rockets, all made by Iran. So let's not forget Iran's contribution to this ongoing war. Again, if Iran would quit sending the rockets to Hamas, Hamas wouldn't have the inventory to do this.
Chairman Royce, thanks very much for joining us on New Day.
Thank you, Wolf.
Let's see what the Secretary of State can do, if he can do anything to work with the Egyptians, the Palestinian Authority, and try to achieve some sort of ceasefire. It is badly, badly needed. Guys, back